I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot. I've got Brian Honan here, who I've kind of known for a long time through the SANS Institute and other things. So let's see what happens this week on Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The teleprompter now has artificial intelligence, Doug, and updates itself. It's awesome. This week, and talk about them as it relates to enterprise security. You're going to do great.
I think that people think that you and I talk like every day at night. You know, It's like, hey, what are you doing? It's kind of a bit of an exhausting week. And I think that we noticed that a little bit in the stories for this week as well.
Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Minerva Labs stops malware that traditional antivirus solutions cannot block. Minerva works with your existing anti-malware tools to stop evasive threats by deceiving them into a dormant state, dramatically increasing your rate of prevention. Minerva's solution does not require ongoing care and feeding and will not get in the way of business users. With Minerva, adversaries have to pick their poison, implement evasive tactics and get caught by Minerva, or don't employ evasion and get stopped by AV. To learn more and request a demo, visit minerva-labs.com today.
Hello and welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm John Strand. You'll notice that I am not Paul Asadorian. And the reason why is Paul is currently stranded in Florida, which if you have to be stranded someplace, I suppose Florida is as good as any place to be stranded at. But we fully expect him to come back next week and continue on the show. A couple of announcements before we get started today. First announcement, go to ITProTV/Security Weekly and use the code SecurityWeekly30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. Also, check out Source Boston on 2018 on May 9th through the 10th. Go to sourceconference.com and register using the code SW89AEE2. That's once again SW89AEE2 to get a 100% discount. Also, for those of you that do have time machines, you could travel back in time and see InfoSec World March 19th through 21st. Why would you do that? Because the conference was awesome. That's why you would get a time machine and go back in time to InfoSec World. Also, Security Weekly listeners save $100 off the registration for all conference pass goes at Secure World. That's the same thing as Secure World Expo. Check out the discount code Security Weekly. Finally, Paul and I finally released Active Countermeasures. That's our new product for threat hunting. If you want to get threat hunting on the network side and you want to do so quickly and efficiently, check out activecountermeasures.com. Also, we have Brian on. Brian, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, John. How you doing?
All right, fantastic. So do the really uncomfortable thing where I read your bio while you sit uncomfortably and listen to me read your bio. Brian Honan is recognized internationally as an expert in cybersecurity. He's a special advisor to Europol's Cybercrime Center, founder of Ireland's first CERT, and sits on the advisory board for several innovative security companies. Brian is the author of several books and regularly contributes to various publications. For his contribution to the cybersecurity industry, Brian has been awarded the SC Magazine's coveted Information Security Person of the Year and was also inducted into the InfoSec Hall of Fame. Congratulations for being in the InfoSec Hall of Fame. That's pretty cool because I didn't even know that existed. Where is the InfoSec Hall of Fame exactly, and can people go visit?
It's in the cloud, man. It's in the cloud.
It's in the cloud, so people can visit it at any time, right?
Exactly. Anytime, anywhere you want to go, you can have it. It's a great honor to be in that. There's other people there, like Jack Daniels is an inductee there too, and Mikko Hyppinen and Rick Ferguson. Lots of other big names there, so I don't know how the hell I got in, but we got there.
Well, I've been following you and following your writings for a long time, so I know exactly why you're there. So we like to ask this general question whenever people get started on our interviews, and we weren't going to play the game of 3 questions or anything like that, but the one question we do like to ask people, and especially find it interesting when talking to people like yourself, Alan Poller, Ed Scotus, Chris Brenton, how did you get your start in computer security?
Wow, that's goes way back. I actually didn't start my career in IT at all. I worked for an insurance company as a clerical officer. Didn't particularly enjoy it. It was, processing papers. They had a vacancy in the IT department looking after these new things called PCs. They had about 4 PCs and a Wang mini system, and they needed somebody to be an administrator. So I applied, got the job. And over the years, as the company moved from its mainframe-based computing systems down onto the network platform and client-server environment, my role became more and more important. We got more and more data on that environment, so we needed to be more secure. But my first taste of security came back in, I think, around 1990, when we had a computer virus infection. And back then there was no internet or nothing to Google or look for help on it. You picked up the phone, you rang people, and they laughed at you, saying, "We don't know what you're talking about." And through trial and error, we managed to deal with it, and that got me hooked. And ever since then, I was looking at security in my role as a sysadmin, network manager, etc. And I was lucky. The company I worked in brought all the disciplines it had from the mainframe world down onto the client-server world. So everything about security and redundancy and availability was drilled into us from a very early age. So the principles I learned back then still apply today, and still hold true.
Cool. So I got another question for you, and this is just more or less a personal question. When and what was it that actually tipped you over to actually decide to start your own consulting corporation?
Yeah, well, I worked for many different companies, and as I said, I worked for that insurance company for nearly 10 years. I then worked for a Swiss consulting firm for 4 years. I then worked for 2 other companies and decided, you know what, I'm spending a lot of time doing a lot of work for other people to make money. So maybe it's time to set up my own business. I always had the itch to be an entrepreneur or to run my own business. And I also felt, now this is back in 2004 when I set up BH Consulting, I felt there was a big gap in the market, that if you wanted advice on security, you went to your IT reseller, and your IT reseller would invariably go, "Oh yeah, John, you've got a problem, but I've got this perfect box that's going to solve your problem, and it's going to cost you $10,000, And so there was no unbiased advice. It was very much an IT problem. It wasn't being dealt with as a business issue. And I set BH Consulting up to be an independent consulting firm, which, as I joke to friends now, after 14 years, we're an overnight success.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing that we actually solved that whole "here's a shiny box to solve all your problems" problem?
Oh yeah, it's brilliant.
Don't have that happen anymore.
You don't have to worry about security anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Security's solved. So another question I'd like to ask people, that are running consulting practices is, what project or projects are you currently working on right now? Like, as soon as we're done with this interview, you're going to go work on what? So what is the current project that you're involved in?
Well, our business has various different types of projects and types of customers. The main work we're doing at the moment will be probably of no surprise to anybody listening in, is to do with the EU General Data Protection Regulation, so the GDPR. We're offering services to clients here in Ireland, Europe, US and Australia with regards to how they become compliant with GDPR. We also do a lot of work on ISO 27001. So we're helping a lot of clients get certified to 27001. And then we do the other ongoing stuff as well, like pen tests, social engineering tests, phishing tests, awareness training, and red teaming. So just the great thing about running a consulting firm is that you have such a variety of customers, a variety of projects that it keeps you on your toes.
Cool. Let's start talking about GDPR, because it's something that whenever I'm teaching classes and I'm presenting, people are asking me about it all the time. And it's really sad because here in the States, a lot of the people ask, well, should I be concerned about GDPR? And I'm like, the fact that you're asking me this question now tells me that the answer is absolutely yes, you should be concerned. So can you set up a little bit on what GDPR is, especially for some of the US-based listeners, and why this is a pretty substantial change in the way that the EU is handling computer security?
Well, I think the first thing we have to call out there, John, is that GDPR is not a computer security regulation. It's a privacy regulation, and it comes on the back of the Data Protection Directive and data protection laws we've had here in Europe for nearly 25 years now. But those laws were developed back in the 1990s when there was no social networks, there was no major internet, it was all mainframe based. So the threats and the way people's personal data can be misused and abused have changed a lot. So the whole point of GDPR was to upgrade the legislation to help companies ensure they protect the information entrusted to them by the individuals. So GDPR is a revision and upgrade, if you like, to existing data protection laws. The strong focus being on the rights of the privacy rights of the individual to protect their rights as individuals. So we have, if you look at the history of Europe over the past 100 years or so, we've had lots of abuses of people's personal data that can end up with them being persecuted in many insidious ways, like way back in World War II. We've had the people's personal information abused by regimes in Eastern Europe back in the day, and even if you look at Srebrenica in the Balkan Wars, where 8,000 men and boys were shot dead simply because of their religion, no other reason. We have that history and that approach to privacy in our DNA, I suppose, within Europe, and that's why it's very important. And the GDPR, as I said earlier on, is a way for the EU to ensure that people's personal data is protected properly when it's given over to companies.
And that's interesting for me because you said it's a privacy requirement, not necessarily a compliance framework. So that begs the question: whenever you're doing a consulting engagement for organizations, and you're doing a GDPR assessment, what exactly does that entail? Because you keep hearing people say it's privacy, it's not compliance, but it seems like a lot of the consulting firms that are out there are actually treating GDPR assessments as though they are in fact compliance assessments, with setting up checklists and making sure that certain key components in the security architecture are properly met.
Yeah, so GDPR is at its core is a risk-based regulation. So it can't be a checklist that is used across different organizations. It's based on the type of data you hold, who has access to that data, and then you do a risk assessment based on what would be the impact to the individual if this information was breached or was misused in some way. And then based on that, you ensure that you meet the different articles in GDPR to control and manage that information. So there is a lot of confusion out there that GDPR is like a checklist or a compliance framework and go check, 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 check. We have all these things in place. We are now compliant with GDPR. That's not true. At its core is your privacy risk assessments and your data protection impact assessments. They are key, and how you manage that data and protect it is important as well. And it's not just computer data you have to worry about; it's physical data as well, and any other type of data, say CCTV cameras, audio recordings, all that sort of stuff. That any information that can identify a living individual will be deemed personal data and fall under GDPR.
Now, you mentioned kind of an interesting perspective in the European Union on how they look at privacy and how you look at privacy. And I can't help but think, you look at GDPR and then you're comparing and contrasting that with some of the things that have happened in the United States that actually has impacts on people in Europe, like the recent Facebook, I don't want to call it a breach, but the Facebook data with Cambridge Analytica and with Equifax. And it seems like a lot of corporations in the United States, private data of people is actually a product that is to be sold and analyzed. And how exactly do you think something like GDPR will impact those corporations? I mean, it's not just a U.S. corporation in Facebook, and even Equifax wasn't even U.S. because there was a whole bunch of people from Europe that were actually in the Equifax breach as well. How do you think that GDPR is going to impact organizations that harvest, that collect data on private individuals, and more importantly, they're acting on that data and selling that data actively to third parties?
Yeah, well, firstly, GDPR, even though it's an EU regulation, applies to any company anywhere in the world or any organization anywhere in the world that processes and stores data on living individuals resident within the EU. So, John, if you were living here in Ireland, GDPR would apply to your personal data, even though you're not an Irish citizen or an EU citizen. So that's one of the myths that people have to be aware of. So it's people resident in the EU. It is, as I said, it applies globally. So Equifax, Facebook, yes, they're US companies, but they're targeting EU residents and they're processing and storing their data. So GDPR puts an onus on all those companies to ensure that data is properly protected. And you are right, there is a different approach to personal data between Europe and the US and many other jurisdictions. So in Europe, it is my personal data. I hand it over to an organization. They have to get my permission to do with my information what they want to do. And GDPR brings that even more to the fore. They have to get explicit permission from me to do what they want to do with my information. I have to give them that permission. Now, that can be based on contractual basis or legitimate business reason or consent, but you can't take my data and then suddenly decide, oh, we're going to sell it to a third party, or we're going to put Brian's information onto our mailing list, or let's use this information for this other purpose that I haven't given you permission to do it. So that's the big change that companies will have to be aware of, that the information is not theirs to do with it what they need, what they want. They have to get a legitimate and legal basis to process and store the information from the individuals.
Now, one of the things that I also think is interesting is people say, what is the cost for us not being in compliance with GDPR? Once again, you said it's not a compliance framework, and I think that entire question is wrong. So so there are costs associated with GDPR. They may not be traditional costs as an auditor coming in and then finding you. Where would those costs actually come into play with GDPR?
Well, GDPR, where the costs come into play, are the punishments you can get from a regulator if you're in breach of GDPR. So the one that gets all the headlines is the 20 million euro fine, or 4% of your global turnover. So if you're in gross breach and grossly negligent under GDPR, that's the maximum fine you can pay, you could face. If you don't report a breach, which now it is now mandatory under GDPR for you to report a security breach in certain situations. But if you don't report the breach properly, you can face an additional fine of up to 10 million euro, or 2% of your global turnover. So if you haven't protected the information properly, and then you've had a breach and haven't managed the breach properly, you could have significant fines there. Now, the maximum fines are, as I said, up to 30 million euro, but I don't see them being that high. The Irish Data Protection Commissioner has said that she will fine companies, and she will fine them enough to be more costly than being compliant with GDPR. So simply hedging the bet, saying, I'm not going to spend money on GDPR and I'll pay the fine, it's going to be cheaper, that's not going to work. But companies need to remember there are other punishments and other things that regulator can do to ensure you are complying with GDPR. So first of all, they can stop you from processing information. They can say, hey, John, you're no longer allowed to use the information for that purpose anymore.
Hey,
they
Erica?
could also they could also the information, they can say that information has to be removed. You could also face civil fines, not civil fines, but civil cases. So as an individual, I can sue your company, and we can do class action lawsuits as well on top of that. So there's quite a number of other different punishments, if you like, or enforcements that can happen that could cause you your company a lot of problems.
On your website, you mentioned that you do a lot with like cloud forensics and cloud computing and serverless computing and all of these different things. And kind of sticking with this theme, whenever we're talking about where data actually resides, how does that actually complicate matters like GDPR for many corporations?
Well, firstly, on the GDPR, you have to know where your data is. And under GDPR, it is illegal to export personal data outside the EU unless certain conditions are met. So if you want to use a cloud provider based out of the US, you either have to make sure that cloud provider is part of the EU-US Privacy Shield program, which is a program run by the US government where companies sign up to and attest that they will have appropriate security in place to the same level as required by GDPR. If you're not part of the US Privacy program, then I, as the EU organization, I'm responsible for ensuring that you're contractually obliged to provide the same level of security to me as well. So that's the thing you need to keep into consideration when it comes to GDPR, and that you need to know where your data is. So coming to forensics, well, then obviously the challenge then is trying to figure out, well, what data is where, and where are the log files, and where's the evidence that I need, and how can I forensically capture that data and present it back in to a client or to a court in a reasonable way. And what we're doing with our cloud forensics offering is that we are offering a broker-like service where that we develop the process, the procedures, and the techniques that we can work with the cloud providers and their security people to gather the information on behalf of a client. So, clients may have a number of cloud providers, but they may not have a dedicated security resource with cloud security knowledge or know how the cloud works. That's where we can plug the gap. We can provide you with that information. You can come to us and say, hey, we've had a breach, and then we can liaise with the cloud provider to get the data you need to investigate the breach.
Now, one of the things we've noticed with a lot of our engagements with cloud providers in general is a lot of times the data that we would traditionally want to have access to is not present. Either they just don't capture that level of data, that granularity, or the customer wasn't paying for a high enough tier to gain access to the log data. I'll just give you an example. We thought we had an incident a while ago in one of our cloud provider systems that we're using, kind of like a Dropbox type system for sharing files. And we wanted to be able to pull down a log of every single person or account that accessed specific files over a specific time frame. And in that situation, the cloud provider said, sorry, that data is not available. You need to pay this extra tier to get that. Now, do you find in doing cloud forensics that the cloud providers usually have that data? They're just not going to give it to you unless you pay, and you can pay and then still get access to that data? Or do you find that that data is not being collected at all unless you have paid, and then they start collecting that data after the fact?
The answer is it depends. So yeah, it varies. It varies to the cloud providers, but you're absolutely right. So when we engage with clients, first of all, and they're looking for us to help them on their cloud security, we provide a review of their tenancies in the cloud, and we look at what their settings are and their security settings to ensure that they are at the right tiers and they are gathering the right information and it is being logged properly and stored properly in the and that can be accessible. We do invariably get somebody who'll ring us up out of the blue saying, hey, I've had a security incident, it's in the cloud, can you help me? And then we will have to liaise with the provider and see what information can we get. Or we may look and see, can we get any ancillary or supporting data elsewhere, maybe from the firewall logs of the provider, or if it's an internal breach that we suspect somebody internal in the organization has caused a security breaches, maybe looking at the internal devices in the organization to see, well, who accessed that cloud service, what level of access they have, and working back through the various devices, be that firewalls, proxy servers, down to suspected individual PCs as well. But that can be quite time consuming and quite costly, and sometimes when you turn around to the client and you say, yeah, this is the projected bill that you're going to face for this case, it can sometimes turn them off, unless it's a legal case, and then the funds are suddenly available.
Yeah, it's amazing how the funds kind of show up very, very quickly whenever it's all about critical data. Speaking of funds, you've done a lot of research and you've done webcasts with like Lance about social engineering, and also you've talked a little bit in some of the presentations that I've seen you give, talking about email fraud. I know that you just tweeted on this like yesterday. When you're looking at email fraud, the type of attack where someone tries to get you to do a funds transfer, it's a highly targeted social engineering attack. Do you see this as like an evolution, or is this basically the same type of attacks that we were seeing back in the 90s? Or are you seeing them getting polished, more sharpened, and more targeted today whenever you're talking about these email fraud attacks?
Yeah, I gave a keynote at the Virus Bulletin conference in Madrid last autumn, and the core point of my keynote was that we keep failing over and over again as an industry. You know, like antivirus software. So we've been paying for antivirus software for 20 years. And now you have to buy anti-ransomware software. Like, I'm going, hey guys, ransomware, we've had it for 20 years. We had ransomware back in the 90s, except back then you had to do a wire transfer to pay the ransom. So, you know, it's quite easy to catch the criminals. We now have an environment where with cryptocurrencies, it's much easier for criminals to monetize these attacks. But yet we have, you know, attack that's over 20 years old. We have antivirus vendors trying to sell us extra things, extra features, extra software to protect us against the stuff they should be protecting us in the first place. You know, so that was the core thing I was giving out about. And the same thing with the CEO fraud or business email compromise. My father is in his 80s, and he asked me a few months ago, he says, hey, Brian, you know, I don't understand much about computers. I know how to use Facebook, and I can book my airline flights and use email, but what is it that you do from a security point of view? So I was desperately trying to think, how can I explain to my father, who's not tech literate, how computers work, how the internet works, and how you do cybersecurity. So I started to explain to him about Nigerian 419 fraud, where people get emails saying, I'm the deposed prince of some country, I've got $20 million in a bank account, give me access to your bank account and I'll give you a percentage of that money to keep. And he laughed. He says, you mean that fraud is still happening? And I says, what do you mean? Have you got those emails? He says, have I got those emails? I got telexes back in the 1970s and letters from the 1970s into our office with the same scam and asking people to respond to it. So I think fundamentally a lot of the issues we deal with from an instant response point of view, and you mentioned at the beginning and in my intro that I run the CERT here in Ireland as well, a lot of the issues we deal with come back to basic hygiene, security hygiene. Like CEO fraud is not that advanced. You know, if I was to walk into somebody's business office and say, hi, I'm your CEO, pay $10,000 to this bank account and wire it out tomorrow, I'd be kicked out by security straight away. But if I send an email in and just change the domain from .com to .co or .in or something, bingo, I've got $10,000 in my account. You know, like that is not a cyber attack. That is fraud. It's computer enabled. It's cyber enabled, but it's not a. I
also think that shows something, that those cultures are susceptible to those types of attacks. And a lot of the incidents that we've worked with that happened whenever I talked to the victims. Unfortunately, the people that get blamed for these attacks, right? The people that clicked the link, that did the transfer. I find out that there's a history where the CEO, CFO, whoever is very adamant about, you will do this now. You will not question me doing this now. They have that. They almost have a culture that enables that type of fraud to then occur. And that's a hard lesson to explain to a company. To basically say, this happened not because this person was stupid, but because this exact thing that just stole like $100,000 from your organization has happened from you in the past 10 times over the past year. And I think that shows a lot of how we just, sometimes the culture that we have enables security. It's like SSL certificate warnings. We have legitimate apps that have SSL certificate warnings. We've just trained everyone to ignore SSL certificate warnings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the failings we have as the industry is that we blame the user. We say, the user is the weakest link. But, I would liken cybersecurity to car safety. Again, going back to my father, he's a great guy. He's great with telling stories. But he telling me the story many years ago when he was a kid in the west of Ireland, where one of his neighbours bought a car. And it was the only car in the town, and it was great excitement. But he's compared the car then to what they are now, and he's saying, Brian, there was no seat belts, there was no anti-brakes, ABS braking in it, there was no crumpled zones. It was a bench. There wasn't individual seats. There was he said there was even no basics to stuff like a radio or even a heater. So this neighbor in the wintertime cut a hole in the floor of the car and then into the exhaust pipe to allow the fumes from the exhaust pipe to come into the cabin of the car to keep him warm. Now, this person wasn't stupid, because they mustn't have been stupid to earn enough money to buy a car back then. But they done something out of not understanding the risks. And nowadays, we have, if you take car safety, we've roads that are designed to be safer. We have traffic laws that are enforced by police. People have to be trained and pass a certain minimum of competence before they're allowed to drive. Though many, you look at the road, you wouldn't
might
think I've
argue
done that,
right?
And our cars are much safer. They've lots of airbags and crumpled zones and stuff. So we're more protected in our cars. If we make a mistake, and people can make mistakes, they can fall asleep at the wheel, they can speed, they can hit. A failure could happen a mechanical failure can happen to cause a crash. They're better protected. They're protected from their mistakes. In IT, we don't protect people from mistakes. It shouldn't be a case that if I get an email and I click on a link, then boom, I've infected the whole organization and held it up to ransom. Likewise with a PDF, or that I respond to an email and $100,000 has gone out of my account simply because I was responding to what looked to me to be a legitimate request. We can't train everybody to be security or IT experts like we are in our industry, and I think that's where we need to address the problems we have. Is focus more on the end user and make them better protected from the systems that we design badly.
Absolutely. Also, I wanted to get to a couple of more topics. One, you have written and talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and computer security. And just out of curiosity, I love getting other people that have been around for a long time. It's funny, you talk about the 90s, and that's really where I kind of got started in security, and in the 2000s. And no matter what we say, we always sound old. When we're like, back in the 90s when we did this, we still had the same problem. And we're always going to have that. But when we're looking at artificial intelligence and that being leveraged in security, it is new. But I think that everyone automatically assumes that it's a good thing and it's going to solve a lot of problems. I mean, for like people like you and me that have been around a long time, this is like the 10th or 15th information security panacea that's come down the pipe. Where do you think artificial intelligence will be effective? And where do you think artificial intelligence and security is probably a ways off from being effective?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to clearly define what artificial intelligence is. And that's something that we're struggling with. Coming back to when I worked in IT back in the 90s, one of my teammates was in charge of artificial intelligence for the insurance company I worked with. So artificial intelligence itself is nothing new. But when I look at a lot of the products that come out from vendors and they're touting it's got artificial intelligence or machine learning or whatever the phrase du jour it is, they're just advanced scripts. They're if-then scripts. There's no intelligence driven behind them. It's if this situation happens, then do this. To me, artificial intelligence is that if this happens, evaluate the context of what the issue is happening in, and then decide what needs to be done based on that. And I think we're quite a way away from that. But hey, AI is going to sell more shiny boxes, so it's good.
Yeah. Speaking of selling things, cryptocurrencies. I'm really, really, really into cryptocurrencies lately. And I don't mean from the perspective like I'm investing in cryptocurrencies and I'm going to be a crypto millionaire. I love watching it because when you have cryptocurrencies like Ponzi coin that literally says it is a scam, make $75 million or whatever it made, and anybody can stand up their own cryptocurrency overnight and get millions of dollars. It's another hype cycle, right? Blockchain is going to solve a whole bunch of things. I do believe that there's something there eventually, but I'm not really all that interested in it at the moment from a security perspective. However, in the past, I would say 10 months, I've seen this amazing shift happen from ransomware to crypto mining, like CoinHive inside of browsers. And I wanted to ask, are you seeing that in your engagements with your customers as well, kind of that shift from raw ransomware over to crypto mining in browsers?
Yeah, we're seeing combination of both, and I think what that is indicative of is not anything to do with the technology, but that criminals will follow the money, and criminals will look at ways to monetize things quickly and as fast as they can. So you had back, I don't know if it hit the States there a few weeks ago, but there was a company called Browse Aloud which puts a plugin, a JavaScript plugin that you can put on your website that enables those who have hearing issues to have the screens read to them so they can experience the website. The Browse Aloud website was hacked and the JavaScript was changed that ended up that every company that had the plugin installed in their website had crypto mining software put on their website as well. And that's what criminals are looking to do. They're looking to make money as quickly and as easily as possible, and they're going to use cryptocurrencies, they're going to use blockchain, they're going to use AI, machine learning, and all the stuff that we use they're going to use as well, but they're going to do it much better than we have because they got better budgets.
So kind of on that note, do you think that we're starting to see this shift? Like there's still a lot of ransomware that happens, but I almost think, and I'd love to get your take on this as well, is that we're seeing the shift over to cryptocurrency, because in the longer run, if you're mining something like Ethereum or Monero or lesser Bitcoin, we don't see that very much anymore, you can stay on a system for an extended period of time because you're not killing the host like you did with ransomware. You get on the box, you immediately lock the system up. That's immediate, that's visceral, and it's very dramatic to the quote unquote host or the victim. With cryptocurrencies, I'm seeing organizations that are basically mining, or like 10, 15 hosts that are mining for days, if not weeks, and they're going undetected. So do you think that this is going to be an easier way for organized crime to make money because they can stay persistent on networks for an extended period of time?
Yeah, and the key to them doing that, though, is writing good software, because I can't remember the website, but one website gave you the option of either visiting the site that had full of ads, or you could visit the website and have them install a crypto miner on your browser and install. You could pay for the content through crypto mining, but everybody complained that their browser just suddenly froze because the crypto mining software just took up so much CPU cycles and just clogged the browser. Sorry?
I just said that's bad software. If they wouldn't have been so greedy, if they would have just used 10%, no one would notice.
Exactly. But no, absolutely. We are going to see criminals look at ways they're going to make money as quickly and as easily as possible. And they have the resources. They have the staff. I worked with a reporter there a while ago who went in to do some investigation about ransomware. This person knew nothing about cryptocurrencies. He said the best tutorial he ever got was from the criminals help desk and walking them through how to set up their cryptocurrency and pay their ransom.
It's sad. We had one executive that said that the ransomware help desk was better at supporting their end users than their actual real help desk, and that's exactly, a sad state of affairs when that happens.
And that's because, from a security point of view, if you take it, criminals are looking to monetize as quickly and as easily as possible. And we've seen this shift. We still have malware out there that will infect hosts that will go undetected, that will allow them to, capture credit card details, banking details, or any other details. But the money comes quicker when you hold a machine to ransom or you do crypto mining. And by the way, just on ransomware, for the listeners out there, the Europol has a very good website called nomoransom.org. Where any keys that are discovered by various different security companies like McAfee, Symantec, Trend Micro, Kaspersky, etc., they're all put up on the website and made available for free to victims. So if you become victim of a ransomware attack, your first port of call should be nomoransom.org, and hopefully they can give you keys. If you don't, well, then you should have a good backup.
Yep. Now, one last question I like to ask is, we talked about a lot of topics. If you look at GDPR, I'm sure that that's something you talk about constantly in every single interview that you give. We talked about a lot of different topics. Are there any topics that you're interested in right now that you think are going to be important that you don't really see a lot of people discussing in the industry at this time?
Good question. I still think as an industry we get distracted by the shiny stuff, the new stuff. We just talked about cryptocurrencies, but if you have good security on your website or good security, so that you don't blindly trust updates from a third party to their JavaScripts, that you can, make sure that you've got good change control in place, that you've got good AV in place, that you've got other good stuff in place, you're going to deal with 80 to 90% of the threats. And I think we just need to stop looking for the bright, shiny new thing to come along that's going to save us. Like Raj Samani, who's the chief scientist with McAfee Labs, quoted there a while ago, he said, in security, we're constantly looking for the next silver bullet, but not every threat is a werewolf. So we should look at what we have in place, and I think we tend to look for new things. If you look at what's in place already in many of the modern operating systems we have, if we're to lock them down and turn on a lot of the security features that they have, that's going to make things much more secure. But unfortunately, in many enterprises, our software developers, both internally and externally, have not developed in a secure way. So you still have applications that require local admin access to a computer in order for it to run, or they need to write to the temporary directory, etc. So trying to lock a machine down in an enterprise environment can be difficult, but we should be looking more and more to moving towards that area and enabling a lot of the security features that are available in these environments for free, without having to go out and spend a whole lot of money on third-party solutions or software.
And that's a tough sell, right? To basically go to people and say, look, you don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can do a lot of this stuff with no cost. It's not a bright, shiny object. It's not something that's new that they could just, but these guys, if we buy their product, like going back to what you said at the beginning, if we buy their $10,000 box, magic's going to happen. This time, it's really going to work. We know it hasn't worked in the past 20, 25 years, but this time it's finally going to. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Next time you're actually at a SANS conference with me at the same time, swing by and say hi. Let's get together and have a beer.
Absolutely.